Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final day of the third annual Ontario West Midwifery Conference. Our first 2 days have been absolutely amazing, and honestly, today is looking like it's going to be the same. We have a really great lineup on our plates for today. Our theme for the final day of the conference is Advancing Midwifery Leadership, and I'll be your host for today. My name is Lauren Columbus, and I'm the Academic Practice Lead for the Department of Midwifery here at LHSC. Today, we've got some truly exceptional leaders present to share their different experiences and thoughts on leadership, all the way from the practice level up to the national level. We hope you enjoy hearing about some of the work that midwives are doing on our behalf and that you leave feeling inspired today and maybe even inspired to work on some of these skills yourself. I also just want to really thank our panelists as well as our presenters who came today. They took time out of their busy schedule to share their knowledge with us, and I'm extremely grateful. I'd also like to start off the conference with just a slight shift from a land acknowledgement today, instead to do an acknowledgement of the great loss of the Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair. As you likely know, Murray Sinclair passed this week at the age of 73, and he leaves a remarkable legacy from his career as a leader and lifelong advocate and champion of Indigenous rights, as well as in his efforts towards reconciliation. He was the first Indigenous judge in Manitoba, and he was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which included his landmark report on residential schools. He was also a Canadian senator at the end of his career. But something that I thought I'd bring up today is that he has an often overlooked contribution to his groundbreaking work in patient safety and quality improvement. He presided over Manitoba's pediatric cardiac surgery inquest in the 1990s, and his report from that inquest really changed the trajectory of patient safety, accountability, and medical error in Canada. Honestly, his report, he was 20 years ahead of his time with his thinking on blame, shame, error, psychological safety, and interprofessional relationships in healthcare. And he's a true hero of mine. Early in his career, he earned his reputation of, if there's something difficult that has to be done, just get Murray to do it. And he did. And I think as fellow healthcare providers, I'd strongly recommend taking the time to read his findings from the TRC, his residential schools report, and the pediatric cardiac inquest, just in his honor. As so many have said, his loss is all of our loss, but he sure did leave us a path forward. So I'm going to end with a quotation just before we move on. This is one of his quotes that I really like. I want to be able to leave this life, this earth, thinking I have moved the conversation along a little bit, and I hope you will commit your life to the same thing. So just some small housekeeping notes before we begin. All participants' Zoom and audio should just remain off during the presentation. We will be recording all presentations today, and we'll be sharing them on our website once they're completed. At the end of the speaker's presentation, we're going to leave a couple minutes for questions, so please put them into the chat and I can read them out. But if we run out of time, you can keep posting in the chat, and most of our speakers have said they'll stay around for a few minutes to answer them. And finally, we're going to have a few post-conference feedback surveys that we'll be sharing at the end through a QR code. So please don't hesitate to fill those out. We really value your feedback in terms of improving the conference year to year. All right, we're going to move on to the exciting presentations we have for you all today, starting with Dr. Chantal Thorne. Her keynote today will be presenting on building a thriving midwifery practice group culture. And I think this is very relevant to everyone working in an MPG setting here in Ontario. So Chantal, you're welcome to share your slides.
Perfect. All right, give me one moment. Do this. And we will begin as long as I get a thumbs up that everything looks okay on your end.
Looks great.
Yeah, perfect. Yep. Thank you. All right. I'm going to put in the actually, maybe I won't right now. I'm going to mention just briefly before I begin that goodness, what is happening here? Sorry, give me one moment. I apologize. I'm going to stop sharing and make sure, because this is not the version that I want. I apologize. Here it is. I'm going to mention as I'm re-sharing here that my slides are very intentionally bare. And I just want to mention that that's a very purposeful practice on my part, just to try to keep them as uncluttered and simple as possible for accessibility reasons. So I know they might not be the most fantastical looking in terms of colors and imagery, but there's a very purposeful reason for that. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I had many years in a row where I did quite a bit of work with midwifery practices in various degrees, whether it was occasionally one-on-one coaching to working in team settings, visioning, value setting, that kind of thing. But it's been a while, and so I'm really honored to be here with you today to talk about something that's really, really close to my heart. My whole career has fundamentally been based on how to support people in building thriving and healthy workplace cultures. Today, for you all in particular, in a sometimes complicated and beautiful midwifery practice group environment. So thank you so much for having me here today. Midwifery, as you all know, way more than I potentially am one of the only invitees, I'm not sure if I'm correct about that, that has supported midwifery practices, but is not in midwifery today. So I know I'm coming from a slightly different lens, and I want to honor up front that you all will know and understand so much more than I do about the environment within which you're working. I know quite a lot about creating healthy workplace cultures, and I'm hoping to bridge those worlds with you here today. You know more than anybody that your environment can be complicated. There are many challenges. I'll pull up these statistics here from a recent midwifery piece of research. I have a reference list for everybody that I'll share afterwards as well, but 50% experiencing burnout, solid 30% with intentions or considering leaving midwifery. And I think it can potentially, when I remember back to some of the work that I've done with practices and the sentiments that have been shared, it can potentially start to feel like maybe this is just how it's supposed to be. Maybe the nuance, the political scene, the racism, the challenging working with hospitals, and maybe it's all just how it's supposed to be. And I think that's heartbreaking, considering the critical, passionate commitment that the midwives I've worked with in the past, and I'm sure you all as well have. I don't think this has to be the norm. Last year, Nikki Londo highlighted the importance of psych safety, creating a space where midwives can speak up, can talk about the difficult stuff, etc. And my hope is to build on that. That's the theme here. That's the underlying theme of this whole talk. Build on it and look at ways that you can think about the daily practices within your practice groups that, according to evidence, can help to buffer and ease perhaps some of those external pressures that you're working within. So I'll say it a bit in a moment. Again, I want to reiterate it a few times throughout this keynote that this talk, that would be a whole other talk. This talk is about your midwifery practice groups, that specific environment, and what can be done to potentially increase the likelihood that it is a healthy and safe environment for you all as you navigate, again, the numerous different pressures, challenges, external impacts that are sometimes more challenging to control and impact. So what I want you to think about, when I think about organizational culture, I'll get back to this very odd, perhaps, question that's on the screen here, but I want you to think about it a little bit like an internal, this would embarrass my family to no ends, but I'm going to show you my iPhone 7 because that's where I'm at still, folks. I still use an iPhone 7. But this iPhone has an internal operating system that I don't understand at all. But what is happening inside of there is what helps this thing be useful to me, be critical to me, frankly. I don't know what I would do without my phone. It's embarrassing to say, but it's such an everyday part of my world. That's what I want you to think about when you think of the inner workings of your practice group, your practice culture. The difference being, I don't need to understand how this thing works. Somebody else does, and that makes my life a lot easier. You do need to. You do need to understand the inner workings of the practices, the systems, the research, the stuff out there that says, hey, if you're not thinking about this, it will absolutely impact, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively, the inner workings the invisible, hopefully to your clients, etc., operating system. And if you don't understand it, which would make total sense, frankly, this is a whole field of study. It's not midwifery, it's organizational psychology, and it has its own area of study, leadership, its own area of study. But if you don't first understand that maybe you don't understand how it all works, and secondly, reach out to the right resources to do something about it, then you don't get the benefit of what can really happen when a group of people come together and create a team. So that's what we're going to explore today. This question is reverse brainstorming. It's a very typical standard facilitative practice that I like to use with groups that I'm working with. I'm putting it, we're not going to do this exercise right now, but I want to put it out there for something for you to think about. That if I were to ask you this, or if you were to go back to your practices and say, if I wanted to ensure that this place was the most unhealthy practice group in all of Ontario, what would we have to do? And navigate the things that come up, it can be really telling, reverse brainstorming, to then help you to start to say, okay, which of these might we already be experiencing? Which of these are the most critical that we deal? And then flip it around to start to create strategies to address it. So what we'll do is explore very practical, evidence-based, psychologically rooted strategies that you can use almost immediately, some of them, to maybe start to think about how your practice is currently functioning, how healthy it feels for people. But before we dive in, I just want to highlight this, because I think this is really, in the research, this is very important. People can come together and be a working group, and that's lovely, and they can get a lot of really great things done. But in the org research, a team has these components that you're looking at on the screen, and that is different than a group of people who work independently and do amazing work for the people they serve. I want you to think about, and again, this is another assessment thing that you can take home for yourselves. Is our group functioning as a team? Those underlined words are critical. Shared purpose. Shared, that the team members themselves have some purpose together that is outside of your own individual practice of midwifery, working interdependently. A group of people do not need each other. A team in the organizational research says that you work interdependently towards collective goals. Again, collective goals with complementary skills, and you work to hold each other accountable. This is important. This is where you can reap the most out of what the organizational psychology research says about creating a really solid practice group. Sometimes people who don't function in this way have the potentiality that it makes it a bit more difficult to really squeeze out the benefits of healthy workplace cultures. It can potentially make fostering a strong culture, a healthy culture, a safe culture, that much more challenging. But the good news is that we can really work together to create, intentionally work together, looking at these things to create a culture where the members of the practice group can feel more unified, more supported, more client-centered even if you don't have a traditional setup like maybe an employee group would at a hospital or whatever the case may be. So let's look into the various ways that we can do something about this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share some challenges, some things that can make creating a really solid, healthy workplace culture challenging. And then I'm going to share 3 things that can make it easier, facilitators that are perhaps inherent in the midwifery practice groups, what the research says, and maybe 1 or 2 things that you can do about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about some self-reflection after that. So here are potential, I don't know all of your practice groups, but potential things about midwifery, about teams, about groups that can make it being a healthy place challenging. Lack of a shared identity. I'll go through each of these separately, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here reading them off, but commitment and engagement differences amongst the members of the team, and perhaps some lack of clarity, some communication barriers, and perhaps differences in expectations about who we actually are as a team and as a group, and what we do and don't do. So let's look at number 1. I am, another thing to note is I'm only sharing a couple examples, but I also will share afterwards a PDF document about each of these, multiple suggestions of what you could try outside of just the few that I have here, and multiple ways that individual people, not necessarily leaders within the practice group, but anybody can do things to start to move these things forward. So So we've got this idea of a potentiality of a lack of a shared identity and belonging, potentially. Team group, it's that thing. And we know that org psych research is very clear that that shared identity enhances cohesion and belonging. It reinforces people doing more, and the research is just called organizational citizenship behavior. It just means people doing things independently on behalf of and to support a healthy workplace culture. The more cohesion and identity belonging I have, the more likely I am to do those things. So if a practice group functions primarily within a contractual setup, perhaps, members of the team might not feel like that. They might feel like exceptionally skilled, committed, wonderful members of a group, but they might experience a weaker sense of belonging, and that can hinder what you're trying to work towards. So these are just two examples here of things that are actually some of the most basic and most critical, I think, for a workplace culture to be thinking about. Your core values. Those aren't things that are just on the wall. The research is very clear that actually my commitment is clearly connected to my understanding of the values that drive the way we do things in our practice groups. If your practice has them and has never talked about them, has them but doesn't use them to guide decision making, has them but frankly reinforces the opposite, this is going to be a challenge. And if you don't have them, then it's inherently an organizational challenge because the members will deem themselves as, again, skilled, amazing group members, but not solidly identifying with the practice, and that absolutely impacts healthy workplace culture. So things like team rituals, there's a lengthier description in some of my resources about community check-ins. There's research from the Canadian Association of Midwives that shows that strong sense of identity and shared purpose actually leads to a better cohesion and better work outcomes for the clients you're there to serve. So those rituals can be check-ins where we're regularly intentionally talking about the difficult stuff, regularly intentionally celebrating and recognizing, etc. So if you think about a time where you felt a sense of belonging, I want you to think about what created that feeling. How can you bring others to have a similar feeling? What specifically drove you in feeling a sense of belonging, etc.? The second thing is this lack of a potentiality of a lack of commitment or engagement differences. You might have some midwives who are so gung-ho right in, they're committed, and others are not. And the research really strongly shows that that commitment drives actions that create healthy work environments. So recognition is a simple thing. I've got some pretty cool, again, I've got all the references for you, but some pretty cool midwifery research that really clearly states that acknowledgement, seeing me, recognizing that I'm doing my best, that I'm trying hard, not just fake surface, cheery, yay, you did wonderful today. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about intentional moments where we can recognize, support, see, so that I feel more committed and a sense of cohesion to the people who are in this practice with me. It can absolutely foster and create commitment and engagement and help to counteract the potentiality that some of you might not feel that same level of commitment or not. So thinking about something like some version of recognition, or the second thing there is maybe a bit more challenging, but this idea of how are we including midwives in decision making? Where is it safe and relevant for practice members to, and do you know what those are? I have a resource that I'll share called seven levels of delegation. Do the members know yes here, no there, so that they can start to engage more intentionally and in a more committed way to the way the practice runs? Frankly, if you take anything out of this whole thing, it'll be intentionality in practice, creating these moments where people are talking about this. Is as much about supporting a safe birth as it is about creating a supportive culture. You all need to feel valued, seen, recognized, not in the cheesy ha-ha way, but in a very clear and vulnerable sometimes kind of way, so that you can then in turn support and care for the people you're here to serve. So again, reflect. What has driven your commitment? What keeps you engaged? What's one small thing that maybe you can do to help others feel the same way? And mismatched communication and expectations. Very standard, very typical in every team. Clear roles, clear processes for when things get screwy, when things are not going well, decision making, all of these. I mean specifically listed, clear, shared with new practice members as they come on board, reiterated and brought up and used quarterly in review processes. That's that take and try is in the first one. It can feel unsafe to talk about all these things that we're talking about that we know lead to healthy workplace cultures when it is in the day to day, when it is purposeful. Today, we are meeting to say, what's not going well today? What are you still unclear about? Where do you feel like we're missing the boat in terms of the things that we've said we want to do or not do as a practice culture? Creating that intentionality of purposeful moments that are actually meant on purpose to talk about the scary, weird, difficult, challenging stuff allows for a safety that can be different than in the heat of the moment. So perhaps looking at group norms, role clarity, some very purposeful moments where we're checking in to talk about these things in a way that is very transparent, we know can help to create a safer place for people. When did clear norms help you? When did very specific expectations help you? Why was it helpful? What made the difference? And is there a way that you could bring that forward, role model it, take one step to do the same, to maybe move your practice group 1 inch? I have no idea where you're starting from, so that's something else to consider. Your own kind of self-assessment or SWOT. I know it's the language can feel maybe I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, like light, but to really assess where you currently are so that you can say which needle needs to be moved the most for us to take advantage of this research and get the most out of it. But there are some really solid things about midwifery practices and midwifery groups that facilitate, I think, and that you should squeeze all the juice out of, you should take advantage of, that could potentially work in your favor to creating a really healthy workplace culture. And here are 3 of them that we'll look at. Again, I'll describe a little bit about the research and then suggest a couple things that maybe you could try. But we know, I mean, again, when I've worked with practice groups, the level of diversity of thought that exists within at least the groups that I've worked with is palpable. And that's a beautiful thing. The research clearly says that cognitive diversity boosts innovation, safe workplaces, creativity, problem solving, all the things. And I think your groups have this in spades. Whether or not it's safe enough yet, whether or not you're maximizing it, I don't know. But leveraging the fact that there is a very clear diversity of thought in your groups is absolutely going to use what the research says. In particular, self-determination theory, which really says, if you can focus on my autonomy, talked about autonomy and decision making in our previous slide, but my autonomy, my competence, that I am much more inclined, again, to feel committed to do all the good things that you want me to do. So squeeze it out of me, leverage it, create purposeful places where it's the point to say all the scary things about maybe what's different about me versus you, right? Build it in. So I'm not sure how often, to be honest, you have new midwifery members coming on board, or maybe it's students even, but when a new person joins in some way, shape, or form your practice, take advantage of the wealth of diversity that exists by pairing people up. It's such a small thing, but the message is, hey, like let's say somebody said, Chantal, we're bringing in a new student, we'd like to pair you up with them. The message is clear. You wouldn't choose me if you didn't think I had something to offer. And that inherently says to me that I'm a valued member, and then it creates this train of things that we've already talked about. Then I'm more inclined to be committed. I'm more inclined to do the good things that you want me to do. So whether it's something like the newbie thing or even an innovation challenge, this is again an intentional, once a quarter we meet, we throw at this meeting all the most challenging, ridiculous things that we've experienced in the last quarter. And we say, let's hear purposely the most ridiculous, off the wall, this will never work things that you can think of to address this challenge. It is the point to say the things from your experience, your background, your world. It is the point to say the things that maybe in another meeting, in the heat of it, somebody would go, are you serious? Why are you even suggesting that? The point is a cross-pollination of cognitive diversity, of ideas, of maybe the things that we think would be absolutely silly, so that we leverage and prove by formalized processes and procedures that we want to get the most out of the cognitive diversity that exists already within your practice groups. So leveraging that cognitive diversity is a really simple but critical way for us to create a place that feels safer and healthier for members. For Indigenous midwives, the work we do is inseparable from the communities we serve, a strong practice environment. One that respects Indigenous knowledge and care models is vital for us to uphold the health and well-being of our people. All right, Ellen Blair, I apologize, I didn't speak the name of the previous quote. That's something that I missed. Apologize for that. All right, so really saying that even if I might be afraid that you think differently about how we should address this situation, which is fundamentally what resistance is, I'm going to purposely create places and spaces for us to talk about it, for us to do it. It can be really, really powerful. So was there ever a time that somebody's different approach, perhaps even approach that you were frankly quite resistant to, that actually changed your perspective and allowed you to think differently? How can you purposely create more of those moments for you, yourself, your team, the leaders in the practice group, etc.? Autonomy, self-motivation. I think there's a lot of inherent autonomy in midwives and their practice groups. When I think of some of the teamwork that I've done before, there's a natural inclination. There's a solid kind of respect for the deep knowledge and experience that you bring to the table. And there's something very powerful about that. The research says that autonomy, that drive for that autonomy, this can feel counter to everything I've been saying, I know, that individual drive for autonomy can actually really drive motivation and well-being. Absolutely. So thinking about where within the practices we can drive, this is also related to self-determination theory, again, that core need that we have to be seen as credible and to work autonomously within reason. That self-driven motivation can really foster a culture of responsibility. So supporting midwives is autonomy, whatever way that works in your practice groups, staying curious about, could there be more of that? Are people clear about what is and isn't already there? Have we spoken the words out loud? Can be a really powerful way to build a healthier workplace culture. So this idea here of self-recognition might seem like, again, like, well, how is that gonna be powerful for us? But when we look at creating moments for people to self-acknowledge a system, whatever that might be for you, it could be anything. You could use your phone, you could use your calendar, you could use, if you want to do it in team meetings, that's fine. But this reinforcement, this re-acknowledgement, this looking in the mirror that I have moments where I am performing and practicing in an autonomous way, can be simple moments to help remind me of the autonomy, the credibility, and the place that I hold in a practice group. And I say number two with caution, because I understand there are many contractual obligations and ways at which midwives practice both within and externally. But I want you to think about, is there a way to perhaps build some autonomy, some customization, extra within your practice groups that can maybe be a very powerful boost, again, to people's competence and autonomy? There might be ways that there's some customization. There might be ways that we can better balance and utilize the people that are in our groups. So again, here's your self-reflection. When have you felt most autonomous? Can you help others feel the same way? Oh, my time. I know my time is running out. I'm skipping slides. Isn't that horrible? I worked so hard to try to be on time. If you've worked with me in the past, you're not surprised. So I want you to think about, actually, I'm gonna skip over. Is this the one? No, I want you to think about this. I'm gonna leave you with this. Because some of you might be thinking like, well, this sounds like a lot of stuff that the leaders in our practice groups should be doing. I don't control this. These are processes, practices, etc. And I get that. I think that's really understandable. But I want to remind you that culture is not built top down. It's not only built top down. It's built in everyday micro moments, leaning into some of the things that I've talked about. Culture is a shared expectation. That's the only way it can really be powerful. So I want you to have a very small reflection right now, um, of maybe behaviors in the last week. I'm just trying to narrow down that you think really strengthens or has strengthened your practice group, and maybe a behavior that's really weakened the practice group. And I want you to be honest. I want you to be vulnerable. I want you to stay curious and not berate yourself if there has been some. Of course, there has been. Just this week, I asked my own boss at my 9 to 5, what are the ways that I've been unhelpful? And I heard, because I'm human. We're all human. We all have answers to this. But I would urge you to, if you're challenged to find answers to this, either way, that might be something where an opportunity for some feedback might be useful, because you're absolutely impacting the health and the culture of your team, your tone, your body language, your openness to diversity of thought. These are all cues, and they're all having an impact. So I want to challenge you to think about what are the ways in which you think you're really strengthening and what are the ways you think you might be weakening, and maybe look for an opportunity within the next couple of weeks, if it exists, to share that humbly and transparently with the people that you work with. It's there, and it's a small but critical starting point to us all being vulnerable and open enough to talk about the ways in which each of us individually is really impacting the culture of our organizations. So intentionality matters. I think it matters even more than in the day-to-day, to be honest. So building in, really strategically thinking about how to do this is critical. Practice members matter. This isn't a leadership problem only. And your formal leadership, though, does matter. If you don't understand leadership, you don't understand how to build healthy cultures, you're not familiar with the research on organizational culture, that's okay. Honestly and genuinely reaching out to people who could help would be a really important good start. There's tons of resources even online. This isn't a sales cue. It doesn't have to be somebody like me. There are lots of free resources available, and I know the association has free resources available as well. Because here's the thing, this is how I'll close. Alex Bacon, when we support each other as midwives, we create a culture that nurtures both the caregiver and the cared for, and the health of our practice environment impacts every interaction. What is happening in your internal system, even the stuff your clients don't see, absolutely impacts every interaction, every birth, and every outcome. And that's reason enough to even just think micro moments wise what you can do to create a better and healthier work environment for your practice members. So I will stop there. I will stop sharing. Will I stop sharing? Yes, I stopped sharing.
You did. Thank you so much,
You
Chantal.
never know.
I really appreciate the fact that you gave us some very tangible, practical ways to do things. And I'd encourage anyone who has any questions to put them in the chat. And then Chantal said she can maybe take a couple minutes to answer them.
Absolutely.
But we have time for about one question. And so I'm just gonna, maybe if you had to boil it down to, like, one thing that you think people could start with within their practice, like today, what do you think that would be that could make a difference?
Well, I think then if that's the question, then I would start with something like a SWOT analysis. I really would, because I don't want you wasting your time. You don't have extra time. And so I could suggest something. I know I could say, like, frankly, if I had, like, I would probably say something like relationship building, which is absolutely not even anything that I just talked about, but is the basis for fighting the fundamental attribution error and helping people trust each other more. But if you're asking me, like, sooner rather than later, I would say find a way to do some kind of assessment on what people already think about what's working and not working. It's your people. So check within, do some kind of assessment, some kind of simple way to say what's already working, what's not working, so that you then hone in on and really challenge yourselves to work on the actual challenge, and not maybe things that just one person thinks, or maybe that you're just imagining might be the challenge. Tons of information online about a simple SWOT analysis. Y'all could do this on your own. You could do it within the next week or two. I realize that it requires a level of transparency and trust that might not be there yet, but not asking doesn't start. We can't say, so we shouldn't ask, because we might not get the honest truth. You got to start somewhere. And then the way y'all respond to whatever you find out, it's gonna make or break every other interaction after that. So yeah, that's my first inclination would be to try to make sure you're aware of what the real challenge is, so you don't waste your resources, limited resources, solving the wrong problem.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chantal. I really appreciate you joining us today. And if you have the chance to answer a few questions, that would
Yeah,
be
I'll
great.
stick around for a bit. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. All right, so we're just going to move along to our next speakers. And so I'll just have Claire and Abigail turn their cameras on and you can start sharing your screen. Um, so our next presentation is our Leadership Spotlight with Claire Ramlogan-Salenga and Abigail Corbin, who will be speaking about the experience of racialized leaders. So yeah, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you. So I just want to say thank you to Chantal for a great presentation. I think it's going to complement, ours is going to complement really well with what you were speaking to. So I hope all of you can take your learnings from session one and apply it to what we're going to be talking about here today. So my name is Claire Ramlogan-Salenga, and I'm calling in from McMaster University in Ontario, which is located on the traditional territories of the Erie, the neutral Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. And this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'll pass it to my I was going to say instructor, but really my co-teammate here, Abby.
Thank you. And I just recently moved, and so I'm calling in from IWK Health, which is a hospital in Halifax, which is located in the Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Back to you, Claire.
Yes. And if you can advance the slide. Thank you. So we're hoping by the end of our discussion here today, you should be able to gain a greater understanding of facilitators and barriers for racialized midwifery leaders. Also consider ways in which you can, as an individual, help or hinder racialized midwives in their leadership journeys. And also plan some ways forward in which your organization can move from words to actions when enacting some EDI standards and or missions.
Thank you. So this information that we're bringing today, we're going to do a little bit of our research findings and then jump into a little bit of discussion as well. This came out of a midwifery leadership study that Claire and I, and also Liz Darling, Carleen Wilson-Mitchell, and Natalie Pambrun conducted. This came out of, I was doing my master's, and I love leadership. I'm very passionate about leadership, and I wanted to write about midwifery leadership. And so when I went to look at what was out there in terms of published data, what I realized very quickly is that internationally, midwifery leadership is not a huge area of research. And in Canada at that time, there was nothing. So this was the first of its kind in research. It was an online survey for Canadian midwives or midwives in Canada, looking at experiences of barriers and enablers. We did it from April to September 2022. We reached out to midwifery leaders that we were aware of, and people in regulation, professional bodies, and said, can you please do this? And then we also did a general wide survey. And so we know that there's a little bit more skewed towards people who have been involved in leadership in the survey, which was great. And we ended up with 314 respondents. And I know I mentioned the names of our research team, but I think it's important just to pause and say that this research team really was intentionally built in seeking researchers who have, different perspectives, different experiences. And that led to a huge richness in terms of the questions that we've asked and understanding. And I'm just so thankful to the whole team for their participation in this research.
So thanks, Abby. As part of that larger work, I and a few of us, all of us, I should say, we were really interested in looking at the data that we received from the survey that was predominantly from racialized midwives. And we've done a preliminary set of analysis, and this is what we've come up with so far. So I won't be able to really go through all of the themes today. We don't have enough time, but I wanted to bring your attention to some of these findings. So there are 5 general themes that have subsequent sub-themes. Each of these represent comments that those participants made in our survey, and the major themes that have come up were barriers to leadership, genesis of leadership, experiences and opportunities of leadership, advocacy and social justice in leadership, and ending really with evolution and development of leadership. Where I want to focus your attention to is the first theme, which is, excuse me, barriers and leadership. So underneath there, you can see a couple of sub-themes, and I wanted to show you or tell you really what those are speaking to. So for discrimination and racism, this included direct experiences of racism and bullying, a lack of respect for midwifery and midwifery expertise, and discrimination for working with marginalized populations. Other examples under the sub-theme for systemic barriers included examples of a recognition of an outdated medical structure for leadership and a lack of organizational support and infrastructure. Lastly, under the sub-theme personal and professional challenges, the comments included financial barriers and sole income responsibilities. So it's difficult for those to step into leadership positions. Also, burnout and lack of time, and this research was off the back of COVID-19, so this really spoke to those experiences. And the real differences are really felt in the language and communication styles. Skipping over to experiences and opportunities, participants provided comments that were categorized as positive and negative experiences. So positive experiences included opportunities for leadership from childhood into their professional lives. They also were able to participate in conferences, committees, and other public presentations. And lastly, they have had mentorship and found representation in leadership roles. The negative experiences included quite the opposite, which was gatekeeping and popularity contests in leadership positions, a lack of formalized pathways and appropriate remuneration, and lastly, racialized participants reported feeling intimidation, being threatened, and an overall lack of support from other colleagues. The last category I want to share with you today, and then we're going to move into some more pieces here of the puzzle, is the last column, evolution and development. Under the first sub-theme, need for systemic change, participants reported that there was a need for recognition of midwives' value in the broader healthcare system. And with that, midwives need to be integrated into the system without having a feeling to have to be assimilated into the system. And that there was a need to have systemic changes to support equity and diversity. Lastly, under the second sub-theme, professional development, comments were made that suggested a need for leadership training with BIPOC feminist lens, coaching opportunities for new midwives, and formal mentorship and leaders in different areas of midwifery and systems. So with this information that we have here and that I've shared with you, Abby and I want to discuss how we as leaders in midwifery walk our paths and how we choose to challenge the status quo.
Thanks, Claire. And I think it's important, and if you know me, it's obvious, but we are always still on a learning journey. And I think research is really important. And I think it's also just important to share our own experience and learnings. And so Claire and I want to just go back and forth, and I'd encourage you to put comments in the chat as well about some things that we have found have helped. And when we were talking through the research and talking through our findings, a couple of themes came up, and Claire talked about this lack of pathway. And it's interesting, I'm now the manager of the Family and Newborn Clinic, our unit at IWK, and I'm seeing these nurses who have walked through very clear leadership pathways to get where they are now. And my route has been a little bit weird. And that's true for a lot of midwives. And so I think it's hard enough if you are a midwife with privilege to walk into leadership roles, but adding that second element of being racialized or something else really can make it that much more difficult. So for those of us who have had the privilege of walking into leadership, or who are in a room with privilege or with power, the concept of sharing the oxygen is something that has been very meaningful for me. And what I mean by that is, as a white person, I've inherently been taught that my voice matters and that I should expect to go into the room and share. And part of that's my personality. I'm a very vocal person. I'm extroverted. But what I've had to learn to do is, if I really want this group that I'm facilitating or I'm part of, I need to step outside of that expectation that I need to be the one speaking and really go into a room or into a meeting with thinking about, if my intention is that we're all here and all have something to share, I actually need to share the oxygen. And that is, part of that is shutting up. Very simply, part of that is just being aware that I need to take an observer role. And what I've tried to do in my own learning is go from this mindset of, I want to share my ideas, which comes from a really good place. It's not a bad thing to want to share your ideas, but also to have this intentional thought when I walk into a room or I'm facilitating a meeting of, I'm excited to hear other people's perspectives, and I'm looking forward to hearing what other people have to share. I've also learned, and this doesn't just apply to including, or encouraging racialized voices. It's also just a good facilitation, is that we have to be comfortable with pauses, and we have to be comfortable that, if we wait for 15 seconds, somebody else might jump in. And I learned that through practice, where we didn't provide that space and got really courageous feedback from people who needed that. And I've learned that when we pause in groups, it's really interesting to hear who then speaks up and who needs more time. Claire, I'm wondering if you have anything on that end that you'd want to share, or anything you'd want to add to this idea.
I think it actually segues really well into the next slide. But what I did want to say is sharing the oxygen in the room is not only a practice for those with privilege and power. I want us to understand this isn't a us and them kind of conversation that we're trying to have today. We're talking about, how do we really be cognizant of the people in the room and what the dynamics are that are playing out in the room. So I wonder if you can go to the next slide, and I can just kind of keep talking about this idea of about sharing that oxygen in the room. And sometimes that requires you to stop talking to allow others to talk. But then how do we actually amplify the voices of racialized folks, or folks that feel like they aren't able to have a voice in a space? And, one of the things that I end up doing, I've learned to do as well, is you need to really be able to be present in the space so that you can hear what someone is saying. As humans, we are very much programmed to hear the things that resonate with us the most, and what's easiest and the least path of resistance. Those voices and those comments come in really easily. And the other ones, we sort of have a bit of a block. We don't hear it the first time. And sometimes it takes somebody else to say it again. However, that is a bit of a slippery slope if we don't actually slow down and hear someone say what they wanted to say. Another piece of this is sometimes folks will write in the chat, as Abby mentioned earlier. They need time to process. Everyone needs time to process and think, and it feels safer to write it in the chat. And as a facilitator or a chair, or as a peer in a Zoom or a Teams or whatever the case is, please keep your eye on the chat. It's really important to validate and to repeat what is being said in the chat. Even if it sounds like it's being a little bit repetitive, what it does is it lets that person know that even though they may not be speaking up in that space, that their voice is actually still being heard and recognized. And that's a huge leap and a huge step for especially new folks who enter the space, who want to take on leadership roles. They need to know that the space is actually open for them to be heard. Abby, do you have anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not in our note, but I was thinking about this when you were talking. I presented on rounds about conflict resolution, and I was doing some research for it a couple of years ago. And I came across this article that talked about how leaders in particular overestimate how approachable they are. And particularly if you're in a senior leadership role, you might think you're approachable, but actually your teams might not feel the same way. And that's why you need to give different opportunities for people to share differently. So it might be like, you might bring it up in a meeting, but then also give people an opportunity to, to say, like, you can message me after. If you want to talk one-to-one about this, that's fine. But by giving people multiple ways to communicate, that can help with people who might feel a little bit more vulnerable. And I was also thinking about, I'm not sure how many people on this call went to the AOM, the Association of Ontario Midwives Sustainability Day. And there was a moment in that day where I learned something, and I witnessed something where the purpose of the day was for people to share, and lots of ideas are being shared and going back and forth. And there was a moment when a racialized midwife stood up and she said, "We don't have enough racialized midwives in Ontario." And shared some of her experience and then sat down. Immediately, the conversation went off to something completely different. And then the next person to put up their hand was a white presenting midwife or white midwife. And they said, I just want to hold on. And I'm not quoting word for word, but essentially they said, I just want to recognize. And she turned to that midwife who had the racialized midwife who had spoken. And she said, "You said this. And it's really important. And we need to sit with this for a second." And what she did was she didn't take the idea and run with it and give herself the glory. She really like shone this, put the spotlight back onto that comment. And I loved that moment. I think that was the highlight of the day for me, was this aha moment of, oh, here's a really good way to amplify a racialized voice. It took a lot of courage, I would imagine, for this racialized midwife to speak up and say something that was quite challenging. And then for the conversation just to keep moving, I imagine could also have been quite disappointing. So that was just a practical way that someone could do that.
And I wanted to add, it again, I don't want this to present as if we're saying white folks need to save any racialized voices or have the saviorism complex in part of this piece. What we're trying to say is this piece about hearing the voices of racialized leaders coming to a table that maybe they've not been welcomed at that table previously, and now they are here, or that we want to make space for folks at the table, which is going to bring us into the next slide, actually. So I want us to be really clear. That's not what we're asking for. That's not what we're promoting is the saviorism complex or this feeling to do that. What we're talking about is sharing the power. And really this idea of how do we all function and work as a productive team together at this table. Abby, do you want to chime in and then I can close up for us?
Yeah, and and I think it does, like we said, it starts with attention. If we're so busy that we're just running from thing to thing, clinic to meeting to lunch to clinic, home visit, or for me, it's like meeting. It's very easy to run into a space and not have an intention, not to be aware of what energy I'm bringing or what energy the room has. So I think it really does start there. And I thank you, Claire, for bringing up. Yeah, absolutely. It's not like that we want to produce white saviors here, but really, how do we share the power? And as Claire and I were thinking through this presentation, I was reminded of, I worked very closely with a midwife, and we were transparently, we were trying to open a practice. We were thankfully successful in the end, but we were getting quite a bit of pushback from other midwives. And this midwife said, "You know what, Abigail, there's lots of room at the table." And she would say that a couple times. And I was like, that's a philosophy that I think we need to think of more in midwifery in particular, that if we start with this mindset of there's lots of room at the table, that can shift away this kind of like holding of power and privilege that we see. And unfortunately, sometimes that can lead to a downstream, like if me as the solo or our practice partner is holding on to the power, and then you get a little bit of power, then you're going to start holding on to it, and it tends to replicate itself. But I'm curious, Claire, like what do you think? Like if we can start from a philosophy of changing our mindset to actually there's lots of room at the table, how do you think that might impact how we approach leadership in midwifery?
Well, I think the biggest piece here is, you had mentioned, so in our conversations too, we talked about this idea of scarcity and this idea that, we sit in a place where we really haven't been taught how to be leaders or how to be in spaces to show up to be that leader to do this work. And so part of this is asking us to slow down, to understand that this is a learning process. Neither of us have showed up and knew what we were doing right away, but we did watch other mentors, we watched other people, how they showed up in those spaces. And really my concern is this, is if we don't start to change this mindset of the scarcity mindset to one that is more broad and open and willing to share the space, we're going to have consequences. And I wonder if you can go to the next slide. Lauren, I see you. We're wrapping it up. Actually, why don't you do this one, Abby, and then I'll do the last one.
Yeah,
and I'll
for sure.
back
Just quickly, I think it's really important that when we talk about organizational cultures, that we actually value difference. We tend to hire and replicate ourselves. And instead, we need to think about how do we create space for difference. We're thinking about who is a value statement or an EDI statement or an equity statement. And Chantal, I loved how you brought that up in terms of values for practice. You actually have to live it out. So it's one thing to have a statement, but does it actually reflect the actions of the organization? And then exactly, like we have to be held accountable if we say this is our value. For example, that we want to be able to create a space where everything of who we are is welcome, that has to be actioned, and that does take leadership. Even if you're in an informal leadership role, if you have years of experience or position of power, how you live out the values of your organization is witnessed by a lot of people and can make a huge impact. And Claire, I can pass it back to you.
Thank you. So one of the things you want to say, what I was going to go to automatically, was this idea of what is the consequence of us not actually hearing the voices of racialized people. It's huge. And some of you may have seen this before. And if you haven't, it's really talking about, the problem woman of color in the workplace. So really quickly, someone joins a workplace. White leadership is really happy. We've got new voices at the table. We're excited about it. But this person ends up becoming the tokenized hire. No one wants to really believe this. And then when that person now starts to kind of poke holes at the places in the system that aren't making sense for racialized people or for other people that are not in positions of power, reality kicks in, and the response is now there's a denial of racism or denial of there's a problem with the system at all. And we end up losing that person as a leader or a person, a part of our team, and they leave the organization. This is a repetitive model. We've seen it over and over and over. You may have even seen it in your practice. So someone gets hired, they stay for a bit, they start showing that there's some issues here, and then they leave within 2 years. So there is a consequence to us not doing this work and really valuing our words and putting them into action. Our last slide really here is just to say, you know what, guys, I really want us to remember there is room at the table for everyone. Be conscious of the things that you let go in your ears and the things that you actually block. Also open your blinders and pay attention to what's going on, because if we really do want to make this profession a place of growing leadership, we need to learn how to make space and share the oxygen. So thanks everyone for paying attention and joining us on this conversation. I know we're running like really tight. Lauren, I pass it back to you.
Thank you both so much for this incredible presentation and for doing research on it and taking the time to study this so that this can get out there in the universe. We do have 2 minutes before we're moving on to our panel. So I do have a quick question. When you showed the diagram of like sort of the problem person of color and being worked out of the sort of ultimately somewhat forced out of these positions, obviously there would be a significant toll in terms of sort of the mental health and impact that would have on racialized leaders. Can you speak to sort of what supports or ways that wellness and mental health of these leaders can be just provided, I guess, to address that issue?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me? I'm like
looking at each other. Yes, I mean, obviously that's a huge question. Thanks, Lauren. And we have 2 minutes to answer it. So I'll give my thoughts, and then I want Claire to speak up. I think the first thing is believing them. When you bring in somebody, particularly what we see quite a bit is you'll have a practice, for example, and it's 10 white people, and then they hire a Black person, and they're so excited that they finally have this person of color in their practice. They can say now they're a diverse practice. And then things start to come to the surface, and that is a really difficult time because you then have to acknowledge a lot of stuff. It can be very difficult. So I think, first of all, just believing them when they start to point stuff out, and then being willing to do the hard work to create. Again, if that is a value of your practice, that you want to have, a well organization or a safe organization, you can't just say we have psychological safety, guys. It's a safe space. You have to be able to do the hard work and to lean into it to do that. Yeah, Claire, what do you think?
I think we were thinking along the same lines. It's really important to understand that if a racialized person has the courage to come and finally say, like, these are the issues, I want to be believed and I want it to actually be addressed. And the way that I'm suggesting it to be addressed, you may not like, but that is part of sharing the table and understanding that there needs to be room for things to be done differently. That's what our research showed, that old ways are not going to keep working. So, show your solidarity and your connection with your colleague or your person at the table with you, whatever the scenario is. Be an ally. I don't want to keep using these words, but I want us to really understand, like, there is strength when we work together on these problems. So anyway, I know we've run out of time. Thank you all so much.
Thank you both so much. And honestly, if anyone else has questions, please throw them in the chat and you can answer them there. And thank you again. So we will move on, and I'll have Rebecca start spotlighting all of our panelists as I do the introductions. So for this final hour in today's conference, we have a very special panel that is moderated by Ellen Blay. We'll be highlighting the work of 5 Indigenous healthcare leaders who will be answering a combination of questions from the host as well as from the audience. I do just want to add one caveat that Melody Smith, who is an Indigenous midwife who was supposed to be on the panel today, she went into the hospital last night for an induction, and of course, as midwives do, she is still there currently. And so I'm so sad to not have her as part of the panel today, but I think, Ellen, if you still don't mind just sort of introducing her, just so we can get that out there, we'll still share her bio. And then she just asked if I can speak a little bit to the work that she's doing in hospital integration. And so I'm happy to be her hype person today. It's my honor to introduce Ellen and thank her for taking on the role as moderator for today's panel. She probably really doesn't need much of an introduction, as most of us know her quite well. But Ellen is Turtle Clan from the Oneida Nation of the Thames. As a First Nations infant, she was taken from her birth mother at her birth as part of the 60s scoop. She was adopted into a home in the West End of London, Ontario, and did not know where she was from until 1994 when she found her birth family after a decade of searching. She graduated as a midwife from the Toronto Metropolitan University, and during that time, she co-founded Seventh Generation Midwives of Toronto. From 2008 to 2014, she worked as a midwife in a child welfare agency, where she learned more about her own journey as an infant and worked with over 500 mom and baby dyads to reduce the number of babies being taken from their family. She's most recently stepped down from her role as executive director of the National Council of Indigenous Midwives, and she has recently taken on the role of co-CEO of the AOM, where she has worked in the past as the director of Indigenous Midwifery. Ellen believes in the reclamation, resurgence, and revitalization of Indigenous midwifery, including birth practices and ceremony, as integral to the health of Indigenous communities and nations. So I'd like to welcome Ellen to take over, and she'll be introducing our panelists. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lauren. It's exciting to be here today. So I'm going to be briefly introducing everybody and then giving everyone an opportunity to talk about what they're doing. So I'm really excited to welcome our 5 incredible panelists today, starting with Dewasetta Brandt, who is Mohawk Turtle Clan from Gondage Midwives, so that's in Tyendinaga, and she's a midwife at Gondage Midwives. She has been working and learning at Gandagi Midwives since they opened their doors in May 2012, and prior to becoming a midwife, was a birth doula in the community. She currently apprentices student midwives while working clinically. Carol Cucci is Anishinaabe and a midwife from Nipissing First Nation, and most recently served as a policy analyst with the Association of Ontario Midwives. She is a member of the first graduating class of Ryerson University's midwifery program in 1998 and was the first Indigenous woman to become a registered midwife in Ontario, and has held numerous roles both within provincial and national bodies throughout her career. Chantal Antone is Bear Clan from the United Nation of the Thames, whose career in Indigenous health spans more than 20 years. She currently serves as Senior Director of the Office of Indigenous Health at London Health Sciences Centre. She is responsible for leading and developing the Indigenous health strategy for the organization to achieve better health outcomes for Indigenous patients, families, and communities. Melody Smith is Haudenosaunee Kiowa Wolf Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. She graduated and began working in the role of an Indigenous midwife under the exemption clause in 2013 at the Six Nations Birthing Centre, where she currently works and is apprenticing a third-year midwifery student. Diane Simon is a Mi'kmaq midwife and a registered member of the Mi'kmaq Nation, Fort Folly First Nation. She has a Bachelor of Health Sciences in Midwifery and Master of Public Health from the Dalla School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, with a collaborative specialization in health policy. She is a health policy analyst and community researcher with the Association of Ontario Midwives, an established community activist and an avid runner. She recently started her PhD in health research methodology at McMaster University. So I'm going to hand it over to the panelists, and I'm going to try to give you guys like a 4-minute signal with my hand, just so that you got about a minute to wrap it up. But we're trying to keep to about 5 minutes each. So I will pass it over to start with Dewa Seta.
Can everybody hear me all right? I didn't think to log in and check my mic and stuff ahead of time. Where did you want me to start, Ellen? Just like
I think it's wherever
introductions
you
to,
want, really, just introductions to what you do in your community, and then we have some questions afterwards that I'll be asking you in around half an hour, everyone in about half an hour from now, to help facilitate.
Yeah, okay. Um, I think you nailed my introduction. There's not really a whole lot more beyond that. I am a Indigenous midwife practicing under the exemption clause here in Tyendinaga. And I have been doing so since Gontaga Midwives opened our doors. For the first few years, it was a really expensive hobby of mine that my husband used to tease me about because we didn't have any funding. So we were buying all the things and supplies and going to see our clients in their homes, which cost us a lot of gas money and mileage. Since then, we have been funded through the Ministry of Health, which has definitely taken a lot of strain off. And I'm now able to be a midwife full time. Prior to getting funding, I did have to keep a job in order to house my family and feed them and take care of them. So I taught Mohawk as a second language in my community during that time. So I am a second language Mohawk speaker and raised my kids as first language Mohawk speakers here in our community. And they've grown up with birth their whole lives.
Mm.
I have recently moved into the role as a preceptor in our community. I do apologize. I don't really consider myself a leader necessarily in the community so much as I'm just a midwife and I'm here and I'll help however I can. I don't know if that means I'm a leader or not. I don't really feel it. I just feel like I'm me. I don't know. So I have 2 kids. I had midwives for both of my kids. ended up with hospital births, which I absolutely loved, but that did mean I had to be evacuated from my community in order to have my kids, which I really set out as a goal of mine to um, make sure that not everybody had to do that, like that people didn't have to leave the community for birth anymore. That shouldn't be a thing. We should have specialists like it should be available to everybody. Like the standard of care I got should be available to everybody. Um, so I am, yeah, working in Tyndall as a midwife, doing the best that I can, and we're growing our practice as best we can. So we currently have 3 apprentices now, 2 full-time midwives, and a midwifery assistant that we're hoping that we can talk into being a midwife one day because she's so excellent and plans to stay in our community. So that's me.
Thank you, Dewasset. And as I said, for panel members, we do have 5, questions to ask each one of you once everyone's kind of given their more fulsome introduction of what they're doing in their communities. Thanks, Dewasetta. And I think we'll go along to Carol next. And Carol, again, I'll do my best to help you with time and put my hand up when there's 1 minute left to speak. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a timer here too. So yeah, I think you kind of nailed my introduction as well. A lot of people have heard me talk lots. I've been around for a while, like Ellen. And so what I'm going to explain, because I know the question, they gave us the questions earlier, but what I'm going to talk a little bit about is what I'm doing at the moment around education. So during COVID, all the all the universities decided that they were going to do their first year remotely. And a light bulb went off in my head. It happens occasionally that if the universities could do it remotely, why can't we do it everywhere remotely? And I've I've worked a long time in remote areas and very rural areas. I've worked in helped out a little bit in Nunavik, and I knew that there was a lot of professional people coming into our communities, providing services. And in many of the places that didn't have other midwives or even nurses that were Indigenous or language speakers, often the community health reps would sit beside the person receiving the services, and there would be interpretation going on. And that community health rep would interpret everything that the physician or nurse had said to the patient and the community person, and then like to the doctor, and then the doctor would tell her what they were going to do and what was going to happen and what they were thinking, and then they would interpret that back to that person in their language. And I saw that over the years, that person that did that work had such a level of diagnostic information. And I saw them work as first responders, would often diagnose people with, like, before the visiting nurse would or physician would be able to do it. So I knew the expertise and the leadership was there in the community. I knew that we had jobs that were for maternal child health workers. And so I decided with a group of people that were good at writing and listening that we could emulate what was going on at the birthing center at Six Nations and at that time, Tyne was being helped as well through them, through education, and in Nunavik. I wanted everybody to have their education and have choices like Dewasetta after she got paid. I didn't want it to be like Dewasetta when she had her expensive hobby. I wanted people to have a choice to stay home and be the leader they already were. And you're being very humble, Dewasetta. You're a beautiful leader, and we're so proud of you. You have no idea. I mean, all the young people in this room. Um, We have some beautiful leaders in our community, and I want them to be able to stay in their community where they're needed and not be destroyed by a system that's not meant for them, and not have the burden of learning 2 degrees instead of one. Like, I had to make sure that I was developing my traditional education, that I learned about culture. And as a residential, my father was a residential school survivor. Like, I had a lot of work to do. And I had to find that, um, thank you. I had to find that that help while I was there. Done.
Thanks, Carol. Sorry I feel terrible cutting everybody off, but it's a necessary, we're on a different timeline than I think we'd be together if we were in a room. Okay, so Chantel, you're next. So we're looking forward to hearing what you're up to.
Can you guys hear me? Just doing a sound check. Yeah, okay. So Sagweg, you go Ngolawan and gets. I'm from Oneida Nation of the Thames. I'm Haudenosaunee. I'm actually a great grandmother and I'm a great auntie. So I really pride myself on that as my introduction as we look to bringing our younger generations into the world through the beautiful work that you ladies are all doing. And so I work at the London Health Sciences Center as the health lead. And so I've been in this role for about 2 years, and I was just catching the last presentation on where they were talking about bringing in women of color, and all of the things that they were sharing was very much felt like it resonated with me about the experiences that we have in healthcare. And so it's really about finding that balance on being able to walk in. Sometimes I feel like it's three worlds. I know we talk about the two-eyed seeing approach and the westernized world and the world that we live in, but then there's also the third. I feel like there's also like three worlds that we live in our own personal life, where we're as family members, as a great grandmother, as a great auntie, as a daughter, and a mom and an auntie, and a wife. And then there's the one that I do at work. And then there's the one that I do just out in our communities and that sort of thing. But my journey here at the hospital, so my background is I'm a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for 12 years. Very, very painful journey inside academia to make it. So I've lost one son during that time. I've obtained 4 degrees during that time in the 12 years that I was in academia. Very painful journey. And, to hear Carol speak about like, how do we do it different? How do we put it in spaces that make it safe for us? And I know that we're still doing that and it's going to take a long time, but I really want to like, kind of like put the plug in that we can do it. We just really need the allies beside us and we need our elders behind us. And sometimes, they have to be in the forefront of us as well to take to take that leap forward where sometimes, women in leadership where we struggle because we have to take care of ourselves regularly in order to do this work. Because really it's like the way that I've described it is it's the like that tugboat or the icebreaker. The icebreaker, they're the little, the little tugboat that has to go through and break all the ice up in order for, all of their team to follow them behind so that they can do it in a safe space. So that's how I kind of describe it. But yeah, so my career here has been I've been working in hospital for 11 years now. I worked in previously that to more in a political, health, and social field for about 10 years. So I've been doing this work for a very long time. And as the leader in an organization as big as this, we call it I don't know if you guys remember when the Exxon Valdez got stuck in that canal and they showed a little picture of a little backhoe on the side trying to chip away at the ground to kind of unstuck or unhinge the that vessel. And then when I was doing my capstone for my program when I did my master's. That's the image I used to explain my journey. around, one person to do it. And while you can do it, but you need your folks like you ladies around the table, that we come together, we support one another, we lift one another up. And so, that's really been my journey in healthcare, and I still like it. Every day I get up and I come to work and I enjoy it, and I know that it's for the better of our community, and that really is my vision for all of this work that we do, is the vision for the community, and opening those pathways for, our Indigenous midwives and our women and our children to be in these spaces, but that they're safe for them to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Chantel. You were perfectly to time. Wow.
Oh, good.
Amazing. Okay, and Diane, I think we'll go to you next. And then Lauren, will you be speaking on behalf of Melody after this?
Sure, I can just explain the work that she's been doing here with hospital credentialing.
Okay. Okay, so Diane, we'll pass it along to you next to share what you're up to. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just want to add in a quick note about education piece. So I'm zooming in from Toronto right now, but there's no midwifery program, education program on the East Coast. So Toronto is the closest English speaking program. So anyone who wants to learn midwifery has to leave the community, and not just the community, like the region completely. So it's definitely a significant barrier to the growth of the profession. And on the East Coast in Mi'kmaq, not just within for Mi'kmaq midwives, but anyone. So I just wanted to mention that. But for the last 2 years now, I've been working as a community researcher with the AOM within the Indigenous Midwifery Department. And really, a lot of what we've been doing is through a larger CIHR funded project, and wanting to do a linkage between the born data system and the Indian registry as a way to pull data that's relevant to First Nations. And so, but with that, really needing to uphold First Nations data sovereignty and not just data governance. So I think even 2 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about the data sovereignty aspects of that. And so for the last 2 years, I've been working, trying to meaningfully engage and consult with every community to get permission to allow this for us to access community level data so we can do a provincial examination. And really, a lot of that is to get a baseline, to really understand what is going on in pregnancy and birth for First Nations, because we've not had the opportunity to look at this on a provincial level. So engaging with community, needing to build relationships, because first of all, calling into communities and asking the health people to talk about midwifery in itself is a bit of a hurdle, because the majority of communities don't have midwifery. So of the 133 First Nations, only 5 are providing in community birth option. And so a lot of the times, engaging with community, the result is that, they acknowledge they don't have midwifery, they probably don't have data, and it involves a longer conversation. But then once we get over that hurdle of midwifery as an alternative to the status quo, then having to engage in the conversation about entering data sharing agreements and research, which also is a barrier because of typically how research has been conducted. Not even with First Nations, but on First Nations. So really needing to try and change how these processes are done. And I think really, again, having my lived experience as a Mi'kmaq woman guide this process, but also as a midwife. So really talking about how, as midwives, the way we provide care is founded on trust and respect and consent, and really needing to incorporate those values into the work that we're doing. So right now we're in the process of finalizing up our formal research agreements, and then submitting our application with ICES to conduct the analysis. But we have 40 communities signed on. So that's about 30% of all the communities, which feels like a really large success. I think gives us the opportunity again to build stronger foundations and relationships, to be able to engage in what the existing data has to offer. And then from there, being able to use that evidence and information to empower communities to advocate for alternatives. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane, and that deserves a round of applause actually for, being able to engage 40 communities on this, understanding why we need maternal health data when midwifery is not always at the forefront of what they're thinking about. So awesome work on that part, on your part. And I wanted to just move along then to Lauren, who's going to speak a little bit about what Melody would have spoken about that's going on over there. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Ellen. And like I said, I wish Melody could be here to share it herself. But yeah, she's literally doing the work we are talking about her doing on this panel, which is a really incredible work on systems integration and particularly hospital integration. So I met Melody here when she was working with SOHAC through mutual patients, and I was working at the time program here at LHSC. And just in getting to know her and speaking about her in different, with different conversations, she brought up the fact that she had multiple barriers that she was facing in terms of providing care to her clients without having hospital privileges. So even just things like, not having an ID badge and then coming and having people say, well, you're not a staff here, not being able to get scrubs to attend someone in a C-section. Or even worse, being told she couldn't attend a C-section with someone because she wasn't a staff member. And even other things like dropping off her doing Billy testing in the community and not having a lab that could do a stat TSB for her. So she took the time to sort of explain a lot of those barriers to us and the leadership team here. And then with the support of the other midwives at Six Nations, we started a project to see if there was any possible way that we could start a credentialing pathway for the midwives. And so we are about almost 2 years into this project, and many of the folks on this panel have been really integral in that work as well. And while we had hoped to have our pathway finalized this fall, it's looking like we might be more into the new year because of some changes and some issues that are happening at LHSC. And so, yeah, we're hoping that Melody and any of the other Six Nations midwives who are interested will be able to be credentialed professional staff here at LHSC and have all of the privileges and access into the system that registered midwives currently have. And so Melody's been one of these people where the minute that, we asked her, for her expertise and advice and time on this project, she volunteered immediately and has shown up over and over again. She's shown up to meetings, to panels, to present, to advocate. Anytime I have a question from medical affairs about something, that I don't understand in terms of the process, she's always there to reply. She's done grand rounds on Indigenous midwifery at the Department of Obs-Gyn, Family Medicine. She's just there doing real sort of like live system integration in her work. She's also always showing up for her clients at the hospital, and just her presence in the hospital is also is an active advocacy in that she's, people are getting familiar with her face, her work, and the way that she shows up for her clients. So of course, like I said, she's there doing that right now. I wish she could speak about it herself, but I've been very grateful to have her along this process.
Thanks, Lauren, for summarizing Melody's work. And I do, like you, wish she was here to share with us. So for panelists, I just wanted to say thank you so much for introducing us to your work. And really, I'm just reflecting back for just a minute. I'm going off key messages here, but I was in the near the end of the prior presentation, and really what we've been doing forever in our careers is showing up in spaces that are where people don't look like us. Right? We're just groundbreaking. We're moving forward. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of tenacity, a lot of innovation, and all the things that we do. So I'm just so honored that every one of you is here in a community of midwives that is supporting us, but really is learning how to do that. And we just keep forging forward no matter what. So I want to thank you for introducing us to your work and your leadership in Indigenous reproductive health in your communities. And so we'll just start with the Q&A portion of the panel now, where we have questions for each panelist, as well as some general questions for all panelists in the end. And Devaseta, I'm going to start with you. So if you could share a little bit more about your role as a midwifery leader within your community. You are a leader, even though you're saying that you're that you're not, but you are. And in your apprenticeship of Indigenous midwifery learners, how can we improve access to midwifery training pathways for Indigenous communities?
Yeah, so I guess as a midwifery leader in my community, I'm just doing midwifery work. And because it has been so many generations, I think, since midwifery has been practiced in our community, that's kind of where that leadership comes in, kind of whether I want to or not. And it's really, really nice to see just in the time that I have been working in midwifery in our community that it's really starting to become an option for our community. I feel like there's a lot of birthers in our community who never really considered that to be an option. So while they knew that they were uncomfortable having to leave the community, they knew that they were uncomfortable, didn't necessarily always feel safe in hospital settings, didn't really consider that there was other options, like it was always just the only option. So I think just in the time that I have been practicing as a midwife in our community, it's been very empowering to see the confidence being built in our community members, to choose and to advocate for themselves and to show up in those spaces that, they don't have people looking like them, or they don't have people understanding exactly their thought process or the traditions around birthing and things like that. So really helping to create those safe spaces and really, I guess, being a leader in helping to advocate for those and chipping away at that ice and making sure that there is a path for birthers and other people who want to be midwives alike. Both of those groups of people need somebody advocating for them, and I'm happy to be one of those in our community. Becoming a preceptor was kind of another one of those things that I didn't really consider myself a preceptor, but as a midwife, when people want to learn how to be midwives, and I need more people being midwives in our community, it just happens. You just turn into a preceptor. There's no other way. There's no other, like Diane said, there's not other avenues for these people to get trained to be midwives. So either I'm a preceptor or I never have anybody to take over my role for me when I need a break, right? Like I got into being a preceptor because I knew that that's what our community needed, and that was just another way that I could help. And I'm really, really happy to see that we now have 3 students. So fingers crossed, one day I'll get a vacation. So that's going very well. I think for improving access in Indigenous communities, we really just have to figure out what those communities need. And the biggest part of that, I think, was mentioned a little bit in the previous presentation in which they said making space to listen. So how are we to know what these communities need, what's actually going to be helpful for them, unless we actually listen to their answers and do that? there's so many people that are in a space or in a position of authority or of power or of money or of even just time, to be able to help these communities get to the next step. But if we're always just thinking about, well, this is what I can do to help, and I would want that, and this is, I think, what the next stage is, or I've seen this work in town, or whatever that is, that's not actually helpful to the community. We need to ask them and then do what they say, not just think of what we think would be best. Like even another Mohawk community is not necessarily going to need or want what us here in Tyendinaga, Mohawk territory, needs and wants and worked for us. We have taken a lot of feedback, a lot of educational support. Like Carol said, we've taken a lot of support through Six Nations Birthing Center. And all of it, we've had to kind of tweak a little bit to match our own community and our own community's needs. And that's also something that we need to reevaluate every year or every couple years. And it grows and it changes, and we're all at a different stage, and so are the community members, so are the birthing families coming up. They're going through a different thing, they're living through a different age and need different things. So I think the best way to actually help other Indigenous communities to get access to midwifery care is to listen to what they're actually asking for and provide that, rather than listening more to our own opinions and what we think they need and providing that.
Thank you, Dewaseta. You really talk about the importance of the community being really the voice of what we follow along with. They know what's best for them, for sure. Thank you for that. And so I'm going to move along to Carol now. So Carol, you've had a long career as a trailblazing leader in Indigenous midwifery provincially and nationally. And you've done some really incredible work with working on the framework for, community-based education. So can you speak to what drove your work on NCIM's educational framework? Like what drove you to work on that? You spoke about that a little bit earlier, but I would like to hear a little bit more about that. And then the impact that you've had on future generations of midwifery trainees, students across the country. So sort of what's happening now and what your impact has been. Thank you. And again, I'll be putting my hand up with 1 minute in time, just trying to keep moving. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'll also try to put on this timer here. 5 minutes. Okay, so I'll try to talk fast, but I'm not sure what impact I've had yet because we haven't had our first graduate. I'm hoping that as we move along, this will have a huge impact across the country, and even globally. I think that if people can understand that although universities, like I appreciated a lot of my time that I spent there, but it's not a place that has our values, our history. It's a colonial institution. When I was there was no Indigenous professors. There were some helpers and they brought in elders. I think we have a couple of Indigenous professors across the country in midwifery, and there's more and more of us in undergraduate degrees and other places. But our education generally has to take place in other spaces and places, which takes a lot of time. A lot of our young people that are leaders and really working hard, especially in rural and remote areas, find employment because they're bright and hardworking. They find employment in their community, and to remove them where they are and bring them to other places to learn often loses those people from those spaces, and it causes a brain drain from rural and remote communities that is quite devastating to them. So the smartest and best leaders leave and often don't come back. And there's like a huge loss a loss of language, culture, just to name a couple of them. So it felt when I figured out a way that we could do this and that we're continuing, it felt like I was hit that for years by just encouraging people to go to universities, I'd stop banging my head against the wall, and it felt really good to quit that. And that now that we're developing curriculum that can be further developed by communities and used by communities, I'm hoping that everybody will build capacity to apprentice their own nurses, their own midwives, like we did in the past, and that can move on to other people as well, like nurses and who knows, even physicians. So, but midwifery is something that we have always had, and it was a very special profession within our community. It spanned three professions in the non-Native community: nursing, physicians, and social work. And we do three parts of each one of those jobs as midwives, and as well as a whole range of other cultural things that has the spaces have been empty, and that's why the stats in Canada have been so horrible in our communities around women and children and diverse people. So I guess that's all I want to say. I'll stop now.
Thanks, Carol. You got some really important points there that you brought up. I hope we can cover some of those later on. So for Chantel, moving over to you, Chantel, your leadership role at London Health Sciences Centre in Indigenous Health is groundbreaking. Can you talk about how you have collaborated with other members within the traditional hierarchies? Traditional is kind of a funny word there, eh? I'll just scratch that out, just say with other members within the hierarchies of hospital systems. So for example, frontline workers, managers, executives, and policymakers, while advocating for the leadership and autonomy of Indigenous communities. So some governance questions there that'll be interesting to hear.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. So I think first and foremost, where we started really was with, like with Melody. So Melody, had come on the scene before I was here. So again, pointing back to the people who have been doing the work and leading the work way before, I think that's an important point to make around who are the experts, who are the leaders in that work. And so I know that Melody had been doing that. So I had reached out to her, and then really really the driving force had been, this position that I'm in right now. So this is the first leadership position inside this organization in the 187, I think it's the 175 years that it's been here. So if you can imagine that the first Indigenous leader inside an organization, I think we're the biggest hospital in Ontario, or one of them. Um, so you can imagine the impact or the magnitude of trying to take on that work inside an organization. So reaching out to the people who've been doing it before me, like Melody. But what we were really fortunate about is this role. But then I was able to partner with the leaders of the obstetrics care unit, and both of those leaders were influential in helping us at least open the doors and have the conversations and push the need for why this is important for Indigenous women to be able to be in these spaces where they can be safe, and then starting to look at how we can create those safe spaces. So again, you have to start somewhere. And I know some people kind of just think about, it's not just one room. It's not one room, but we have to start with one room to be able to create other rooms or other spaces inside the organization. So they were really helpful in starting to do that work as well. And then really, just looking to Six Nations, right? Six Nations really has been the driving force behind that. And to say Melody's, started to work there, then it's like, okay, let's build that partnership and let's get Six Nations to the table. And so we were able to partner with with some of the midwives from Six Nations and brought them to the table. And that really was, folks like Lauren as well, being, another advocate, an ally in this work to help us advance it. So it's really a partnership with our non-Indigenous allies to open those doors and those spaces and places where we haven't typically been, right? Like as leaders or as even having mentors to be able to do that. So, and then even partnering with our chief, I think they call it the chair of the Medical Advisory Committee. So he was an Indigenous man. And so we were fortunate to have him as part of the driving force again to say, okay, how can we do this in, I'll say, the least bureaucratic steps possible? Because I think we're all familiar with, institutions and the bureaucracy that we have to go through in order to advance equity for our people. So it's a bit of a roadmap, and I wish, looking back, I wish we would have mapped these roadmaps with some sort of, graphic, so you could see where you started and then where it's grown to. So, and then one of the other things is we were able to bring the leaders of the obstetrics, like so they're the directors of the obstetrics unit here, and so we were able to bring them to what I'll just call is like I think we were sharing like wise practices in Ontario with the Chiefs of Ontario. So we brought them to the table so they could hear and they could see and they could either unlearn or relearn or just learn, because I think there's just a lot of the stereotypes that follow us wherever we go, and helping those women to say, you know what, we do know what we're doing. You just need to open the doors for us to help us do that. So that's been influential in where we've been able to advance it. And it really does start with leadership. And we're a small but mighty team. We only have myself in what I'll call, quote unquote, is the corporate office. And then we have 5 navigators. We have 2 in the ER department. So that's a point of entry for people into the system. We have a navigator in mental health, and then we have 2 youth wellness consultants in children's, and then we have our cancer navigator. So we're a small team for such a large hospital. We have 15,000 staff, and we have I think it's almost 1,000 acute care beds. Um, but you can imagine how hard that would be to do this work. So I'm someone who doesn't give up. I'm very much like you said, Ellen, we just keep going. Like we put our courage hat on every single day, our bravery hat, and we've developed probably like that skin that's 7 layers thick. Like that's really what you have to do, but you have to pour into yourself almost every single day, every week, with elders, with women like around this table to lift you up, to empower you. And I feel honored to be able to be a part of this work with all of you women, and the work that Lauren's opened the doors for us to make that happen here at LHSC.
Thank you, Chantel. It's a lot of powerful words there for sure. And I think for the rest of the audience out there, it's important for people to recognize people like every one of these Indigenous women sitting around this table, that what Chantel just talked about, which was carving that way forward. The woods are thick and they're full of, unknown, I would say unknown, not necessarily allies at all times, but that
Yeah,
it takes a tremendous amount of energy, right?
yeah, yeah.
We're taking what we're already been colonized and things like that. We're pulling ourselves out of that. Then we're in a space maybe of equity, but maybe not. And then we're having to use all the energy we have to push ourselves through forward in this work and gather
Hmm.
people around us to try to do this. So it really needs
Yeah.
to be recognized by the broader midwifery community, the
Hmm.
incredible energy it takes for the work that we're doing. So with that, I'll pass it along now to Diane. Melody's not here, but I think in a lot of ways, Chantel, you did speak to a lot of what Melody's been doing as well. And so for Diane, I have a question for you, Diane. And so as a current doctoral student, you have been a leader in the field with your work to engage Indigenous communities in the research process and in formally documenting the social cultural benefits of Indigenous midwifery. What have been the barriers you have faced while undertaking this work, and what has allowed you to be successful? And what areas still remain a challenge for you? Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, it's a nice little question. No, I think like just, I think in this world of like academia and research, like it's rigid. And, as a student again, stepping into that space, like it never feels comfortable. I always feel like we are the round pegs trying to get squished through a square hole. And I think throughout this process, it's like always trying to highlight the different barriers that exist within systems and institutions that make it that much harder for communities and people to be engaged with with the process. I always say that every First Nation student in academia is the embodiment of Edo Optimum, right? And so I think most people recognize that as two-eyed seeing, but it's actually the gift of multiple perspectives. So I think there's a lot that gets lost in the English translation of it. So I really always trying to challenge people to use the language in which it comes from. So it comes from the Mi'kmaq language, but um, just because I think there's so much richness in it that I think really gets watered down otherwise. And I think within that and like reclaiming language again in all this work as well, it's like really being rooted in self-determination and knowing that we like what Dea was saying is that communities know what works for them and we just need to have the space and opportunity to be able to do that. And I think so often in a lot of this research process, like the constraints that we have for like the funding timelines, and there's not a lot of recognition that, in order to do things in a good way, with community and in community, that takes time. And we need to build strong foundations and relationships to be able to move forward, and work together. And so it's such a different process. And I feel as a student, we're constantly trying to balance between these different worlds and wanting to ensure that we're, holding space for community and that that's like our heart is guiding us in this work, but we're also getting kind of stepped on by by academia. And I think even outside of that, just being an individual in these spaces is a huge challenge. And again, there's so many stereotypes and assumptions. And again, even in the journey I'm in now that I just started this September, even from people who should know better, different comments are really harmful and hurtful. And so it takes a lot to kind of continue to go down this path, and protect yourself and keep yourself safe when doing all this. It's yeah.
Thanks, Diane. And so I think we've heard everyone speak of, the challenges that are facing us, and they don't go away quickly. That's for sure. So I wanted to just we're getting low on time, but I'm going to start with a question for you to answer. So any one of you can jump into this one at all. From your perspectives, how can institutions and organizations outside of Indigenous communities support the leadership and growth of Indigenous midwifery? And what kinds of resources, policies, or partnerships are most effective in fostering this leadership? So that's a huge question. But if anyone wants to jump in again on that one, I can repeat it. How can institutions and organizations outside of Indigenous communities support the leadership and growth of Indigenous midwifery? What kinds of resources, policies, or partnerships are most effective in fostering this leadership? So if anyone wants to jump in. Oh, and Lauren is actually saying as well, she's going to include the audience as well here in thinking about questions they might want to ask in our last 5 to 7 minutes. Thanks, Lauren.
I just have a quick comment to that. I think a lot of it is I think there's always these kind of ingrained hierarchies. I think especially in the spaces that I'm experiencing. I think in terms of research, ethics boards and whatnot, right? So when we've been going through our process, we've been going through very in-depth community engagement and permissions processes. and so, but it still feels like always like the academic institution, they need to give their final approval, right? And it's always needing to kind of um I don't know, try to like have shed light on the fact that our processes look different, but they're still valid, and that those hierarchies we need to kind of be more equal approach to things. And I think having other people take on some of those battles and those explanations and really try to get other people to inform themselves rather than us constantly needing to educate everyone else on top of the work that we're doing.
Thanks a lot, Diane. Those are really important points. Again, taking extra work for us to really take our focus off of the work that we really need to be doing and on to supporting people that can certainly do that themselves. So anyone else want to answer that question about how other, non-Indigenous organizations can support the growth of what we're trying to do here of Indigenous midwives and community? Dave Wasetta, you've got your...
This is really funny. This is actually something that my husband and I were talking about just this morning. And I think it touches a little bit on what Diane said and what Carol said earlier about like leaders in our community leaving to go and get that training, to go and get that education, to do these wonderful things with the people who have the resources to do it. But what that's doing is taking people and taking those leaders out of the community. And what he was talking about, so he's actually a language teacher at a university, and he was having some of these conversations with some of his higher ups and some of his peers is why don't the universities hire these people? And instead of making them teach at the university or doing their research at the university, is hire them and leave them in their communities to do the work on the ground level. And he's like, what a crazy concept. It's like still doing all of the things that the university needs while actually helping the communities and leaving those leaders in the communities and giving those leaders in the communities like the titleship that they need, the resources that they need, the funding that they need, like a good salary for the job that they're doing, right? And why not actually just leave those people in community to do that work? By using the resources that these other institutions have. And his example was in the university, but I feel like it could very easily go across a couple of different kind of structures, like in government, in healthcare, in education, in research, in all of these different things. And it really made me think of what we were going to be talking about today. And I thought it was really funny that both Carol and Diane had kind of touched on that, bringing people out of the community and education and how institutions who have resources could actually be helping in community efforts to stop taking the good people out.
Yeah, no, and I see that, cross-cutting across all kinds of, like Diane had pointed out, different places and spaces that we're in. And really what it is about is sharing really the power, right? Which is what's talked about earlier, is sharing that and asking us what we need, not telling us what we need, or not thinking they're supposed to know what we need, because they don't. So it's like, let's start sharing the power and asking communities where, what they want to do and where they want to focus their energies, and full on, without us having to battle it out, supporting us, pull us out, help us. We know how to do it ourselves. So yeah, in our own frameworks. Anyway, so I'm looking to Lauren. Lauren, were you going to come on board as well, or were there questions from the audiences? We got a couple of minutes left here.
Yeah, we have about 2 minutes left. So I don't see anything in the chat right now, but maybe I can just put it back to the panel to say if anyone has anything they want to say as sort of closing words or parting messages for this afternoon.
I have another thought.
Go for it.
I think like when people are asking community members for anything, that there needs to be compensation attached to it. I think like recognizing that everyone who's doing community work is very busy and we're pulled in many, many directions. But I think it just needs to be recognize that people need to be compensated for all of this, and those processes should be made easier as well.
So centering us really, Diane, in your thinking, right? Not thinking of us as, when we talk about EDI, it's like inclusion, but inclusion into what, right? Are we wanting to be included into like a non-Indigenous space? Or I want you to flip it and think about how would it feel for you to be included in an Indigenous space, one non-Indigenous person in an Indigenous room, and what is it that you would be offering to us as Indigenous First Nations, Inuit, Métis people? So. Yeah, thank you for that. So Lauren, I'll just pass it back over to you
Thank
to
you.
close us out. And I want to just say Niall and Goa so much to everybody and fellow Oneida Nation of the Thames. Chantel, good to see you here. Yeah, Lauren, I'll pass it back to you to conclude us. Thank you.
Thank you. And I wish we could keep going for another hour here, but everyone's got busy days and things to get back to. So I really appreciate all of our panelists for taking this time, as well as our earlier presenters from today. We're just going to throw up a set of slides that have the evaluation for today's session. And we would really appreciate your feedback. The slides also have a donation link in honor of Jane Erdman, who was a local midwife here that's had an influence on so many people provincially and across the country. There's a beautiful tribute to her in the CBC as well today online. Yeah, just Google her name in CBC to read that article too. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We look forward to having you, of course, back again next year for next fall for our fourth conference. Again, please fill out the survey here just to leave us feedback. We do read everybody's responses and try to implement the feedback to improve future conferences. Thank you so much.